So glad that you're with us here this morning as we continue a series entitled This Is Us. We're trying to unpack what is behind those things that you saw in that video and so many other things like it, where we lead out with compassion, with grace. Why do that? And simply put, it's because we believe it expresses the heart, the character, the nature of the God that we have come to honor and worship today. And we see that heart on full display at Christmas time. Now, where we live, Christmas to us, it's just, an incredible time of year, right? And I think it brings out some personality types as well. Now, I know in this room there are some extreme planners. And let me see if I can prove this to you here in this moment. By show of hands, how many people here, you had your Christmas shopping done before you ever had any turkey on Thanksgiving? Let me see. The first service apparently is the one where all the planners go, those people need professional help. That's just too much. You don't, go ahead of the bird on Thanksgiving there. But whether we're extreme planners or we're kind of last minute, shoppers, we all have this goal, this dream, this plan in our minds that we want it to be the best. And rightly so. I mean, who wouldn't want that? But down in this world of ours, what we plan one way doesn't always turn out that way. And just by way of example, I want to show you a couple examples that no doubt everybody in this brief video had a plan that we're going to make it the best Christmas ever. But instead, this happened. Check it out.
Oh, go on, guys.
I bring the stone.
Perfect spot for it. Good job, buddy.
Taylor, stand by Dad so it doesn't fall on you, baby.
Remember.
Watch out.
This is Grace's Christmas ball. She's gonna put her first Christmas tree.
Hey, give him a kiss.
We leave tomorrow to Disneyland for Christmas.
Yes!
We're
We're going to Disneyland, Cade.
You're going to Disneyland. Why?
Let me just tell you, there's a whole lot more of that out there, too. And, it's one thing when our plans with that wind up like that. But here's what I know about us, and I know this about some people here in this room because I've talked to you. That we have a plan for life, a direction that we hope it goes, and a place that we hope to wind up. And maybe you find yourself during this Christmas season and you're thinking, you know what? That plan is off the table. And where I thought I would be is not where I'm going to be. And maybe who I thought I was going to be with is not who I am with. And maybe there are some people, that you sat next to somebody last year, but you don't sit next to them this year because somebody made a decision to end that. Maybe somebody's gone from your life because their days came to an end here. Or there's a direction, a dream, a goal, a plan that you had in mind, and it is not happening the way that you thought that it would. I was reading something not that long ago, and the percentages vary depending on which study you look at, but they said actually the majority of people who are going to go through this Christmas season are not going to be filled with, nothing but joy. And the reason for that is because the reality of life in this world doesn't match up with the good and right dreams that we may have in our hearts and our minds. And so if sometimes you feel like, you're faking it a little bit during the season, you know what? You are not alone. And it is something that is all too common. And yet when we look at the things that are associated with Christmas, we've cleaned it up and we've made it so quaint, and we see cards that, present the whole story in ways that are just so calming and beautiful and wonderful. And we look at that and we maybe sense the disconnect of where we are and we say, well, everybody else must be doing okay. But where I am, it's not exactly like that. But here's what I want to say to you today, is that the Christmas story looks great at a distance, but if you get an up-close look, it's different. And for people who walked through it in real time, real people, it was filled with moments of anxiety, of anguish, of questions, of doubts, of uncertainty. Where is all of this going? And you know what? They didn't have all the answers. And so, if maybe some of your plans are not fully realized on this day, let me tell you this: Christmas is your story. And what I'm going to do this morning is I want to walk through a portion of that Christmas story from the perspective of Joseph. A lot of the focus in the Bible, and a lot of times when we talk about it from platforms like this, as we journey through Christmas, is focused on Mary, and rightly so. There's amazing stuff there. Very little is said about Joseph, and we're going to take a look at that here in just a minute. And do you know, by the way, how many words Joseph is going to speak to us? And the answer is, it's a nice round number, 0. And it kind of reminds me that it shows the average woman in a given day speaks 20,000 words. The average man in a given day speaks 7,000 words. I will make no commentary on that. You can discuss that over lunch, okay? And here's what we're going to find from Joseph. He's not going to tell us anything. He's not going to say anything. What we are going to see are his decisions that are based on some conclusions about God and about where all of it is going. But in the middle of it, make no mistake about it, his plan, and really their plan, Mary and Joseph, is going to get interrupted. And if you find yourself in that place, this is your story. Matthew chapter 1, and let's start reading. This is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. And just before we start talking about this, there is a New Testament scholar by the name of Scott McKnight, and he wrote an article about some of the details in this account. And what I'm going to share with you, by the way, details, really comes from him. And when you see, words that are just a matter of a few sentences, it really is events that have played out over the span of months and years, but now they're boiled down to just a few words. And sometimes we can just sprint right past some of the human part of this story, because for many of us, this story is very familiar. But we can easily forget that these were real people who were figuring it out and walking through it one day and one moment at a time. And so we're introduced to Joseph and Mary. Now, even, in our day, we have engagement, but it was different then than it is now. Right now, we make a commitment to each other, and we're going to get married, and we set a date for things like that, and we make all those plans. But if for some reason that comes to an end, we can just break it off, probably give back an engagement ring. Hopefully, all the invitations haven't been mailed out and all of that. But it is a fairly easy process to just say, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. Not so back then. When you were engaged in the first century in that culture, it was as serious a legal and personal commitment as actually getting married. While you still lived separately, it was viewed legally like marriage. And so if one person during that betrothal time, that year of engagement, would die, the other surviving member of that would be considered a widow or a widower. If you wanted to break off an engagement, it amounted to basically the same process as filing for a divorce. So it was a serious commitment that they had made to each other. And what that tells us is that Joseph and Mary, they had plans. They envisioned their life together, where that would go, who they would be, and what life would include. And no doubt, just like anybody else who has ever, begun to walk down that road toward marriage, they had all these different ideas in their minds. All of that is about to get interrupted and the plans are going to change. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she, Mary, became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. And what we're told in Luke's gospel, his account of this, is that Mary goes to visit with one of her relatives for an extended period of time. While she's there, an angel appears to her and basically says, "You found favor with God, and the Holy Spirit will come on you, and you will conceive a child." This is a miraculous birth. And Mary says, "Let it be done to me, as God says." She says yes to what God has in store. But meanwhile, Joseph is back where they live. And he didn't get the appearance of the angel, but all of a sudden his fiancée shows up again, and there must have been an exchange somewhere where she breaks the news to him, and we don't have that conversation. Boy, would I like to hear what was said. "Joseph, I've got some good news and I got some bad news. The bad news is I'm pregnant and we're not yet married. But the good news is, hey, I haven't been with anybody else, and God the Holy Spirit has conceived this child. It's never happened before, and it'll never happen again. This is God's special thing." And what we know from what we're going to read next is that Joseph, like I think any one of us, you know what his take is on that? Right. I'm so sure. And all of a sudden, the one that he envisioned himself with for the rest of his days, who would be faithful to him, has apparently been unfaithful. And so what do you do? Now again, in our day, we can kind of approach that a certain way, but let me introduce you to something in that day that makes it a little bit more complicated for him. Joseph, her fiancé, was a good man. And we read by that and we think, yeah, he's a swell guy and people liked him. But there's something very technical that comes along with that word good. And it's important for us to understand that to get the tension and the anxiety of this story. Because in his day, every man in Israel aspired to be a good man. And another way of saying it is a righteous man. And what that meant was that you did all the right things in the right way all the time. So for Joseph, what that meant is, I don't eat bacon with my eggs in the morning because any pork is off limits in the Old Testament. And the way that people performed was observable to everybody else. So the whole community knew who was good and who wasn't good. It was plain for all to see. That meant he didn't hang around with the wrong kinds of people. And those were identified. The good ones are clear to see, and the bad ones are clear to see as well. And so you associate with all the right people, put you in that category. It means he didn't leave his carpenter shop open on the Sabbath day. He would honor that, and he would honor God. And so he would have it closed instead of just trying to earn a couple of extra drachmas and a little bit extra coin. And he was considered in the eyes of his community a good man, a righteous man. What righteous means is that you are right with God. And that was so clearly defined in that day. But here's the thing that comes along with it. It was defined in many respects according to man-made categories. And so now he's a good man, a righteous man with a problem. His fiancée shows up pregnant, and in that day, that was a huge deal. And in a small community where everybody knows everybody else's business, that could take you very quickly out of this category of being a good man, and you and your life's work to that point would all be thrown aside. So what do you do if you're Joseph? Well, according to the law, he had two options. There's this real extreme thing that said that Mary, as this inappropriate situation, she could be stoned to death for that. That rarely happened during Joseph's day. But the more serious option really was to go to the city gate where there would be a mayor who would be a mayor/judge. And in front of whoever wanted to be there, it was open and available for anybody who wanted to hear what was happening in their community. He could publicly renounce his engagement. And that was a way of saying in front of everybody who's there, hey, look, my hands are clean. It's her problem. I had nothing to do with it. And that might preserve his standing as a good man. But there's a second option. It's a little more risky for Joseph. And it is an option where he wouldn't do it publicly in front of everybody else, but it would only take a couple of witnesses, and he could simply write her a certificate of divorce. And if a couple people witnessed that and he gave it to her, that would end the engagement as well. And that has the possibility of exposing her to less shame in her community. But it exposes him to more shame because people might assume that it's his responsibility and that he's been a part of it. So what's a guy to do? Joseph, her fiance, was a good man and did not want to disgrace her publicly. So he decided to break the engagement quietly. And again, we're not given any detail about how he thought through this. But can you imagine what it's like to have the person with whom you envision spending the rest of your days and what that's going to be like tell you this kind of news, and all of a sudden you're thinking, that's over. That's done. That plan, that dream, that hope, that future doesn't exist anymore. And the person that I thought I could trust, apparently not. And yet at the same time, obviously, he cares about her. And he's going to extend a measure of compassion to her. And so he decides, no, we're not going to go to the public gate. Instead, we'll just keep it under the radar. And we'll keep it quiet, but that's over. The story goes on, and it tells us, as he considered this, and that has the idea of somebody wrestling with somebody. It has a measure of anxiety and anguish that comes along with it. As he considered this, and we're not given the exact time frame either, but we do know somewhere after Mary breaks the news that he is still in the process of trying to figure this out and wrestle with it and wonder, what does it mean? And no doubt figured into that, he's saying, and what about this reality of being a righteous man in my community? That's what every man aspires to be. In our day, it would be like, a man in business wanting to be a CEO. It'd be like an athlete wanting to be an all-star. Be like a football player wanting to be a Dallas Cowboy. You just are aiming for the top rung. And as he considered this and he's wrestling with it and there's some anguish, all of a sudden, right, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, and he's now going to get confirmed to him what Mary already knows, but it is going to be given to him. She has told the truth. This is miraculous. And here's my question, and I wonder if this was Joseph's question, and maybe it's yours too. God, why didn't you just send the angel right from the beginning? Why does somebody have to consider it? Why does somebody have to wrestle with it? Why does somebody have to come to the place where they're willing to write this certificate of divorce and send away the person that they envision spending the rest of their days with? Could it be that the God who was in this moment unfolding the plan that was going to redefine what it means to be righteous, not through man-made categories, but on his terms? And could it be that somebody's heart would be open in a time of disequilibrium and uncertainty in a way that it is not open at any other time? But here's what I know from my own life, and my guess is you know this too, that there are times we enter those seasons or we enter, that place and we wonder, how can this possibly be a part of anything good and anything right? As he considered this, well, thanks for showing up, God. But finally he does. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Why would he be afraid? Well, he wants to be that righteous man, that good man, and clearly he wants to honor God, and so he wants to do the right thing in this situation, and God's saying, that's okay, Joseph, you head in that direction. This is not dishonoring to me. But I think also clearly we must understand that he's worried about losing his reputation. And in this life, some of the things that we fear are unfounded, and we fear things that we should not fear because they're not even real. But there are other times where fear is not unfounded. And what it is that we fear is a very real possibility. And what Joseph fears on that day is in that category of a real fear. Because let me tell you, as the story unfolds, and Joseph isn't even around to see it, we know that that fear was real. When Jesus is an adult, decades later, and he's gone public with his ministry, there's one occasion where something like this is said to him. And by the way, when Jesus is an adult, Joseph isn't even there, so he dies somewhere along the way. But here's what's said when Jesus goes public. Isn't this Jesus, the son of Mary? And to us, that doesn't hold a whole lot of meaning to it because, especially if the father's dead, why would you not reference the mother? Makes sense. But in that day, even if the father died, a child was referenced in connection with their father. And so to say that about Jesus was in essence saying this. In our day, here would be the equivalent. Someone would say, Jesus is the son of a, and then there would be a very disrespectful word for the mother. Was there a real threat to lose something in connection with what was unfolding? Clearly, the answer is yes. Don't be afraid, Joseph. Well, what if it costs me something? Don't be afraid. And the God who is redefining what righteousness looks like doesn't make it in the artificial, cut and dry, black and white version that was created by mankind since this world has been around, but instead brings a new sense of what that righteousness looks like in real life. And of course, it still is about honoring God and loving God, obeying God and following God. But maybe it's a little bit more muddy. As people are invited to walk into the muck and the mire of a broken world, not living under some illusion that, hey, if I just keep myself, clean from every, thing that's around me that's unclean, as if that could ever happen. So instead, Joseph is invited to join God in what he's doing. And I think that's a really important part of the story because I know that there's some people here, and as you have said yes to Jesus, you have maybe stepped away from some of those same kind of ideas of what righteousness looks like, and it's all about the outside, and it's all based 100% on performance. But there's a God who's going to give us righteousness on his terms and not ours. And his terms are different than ours all the time. We will bring it back to ourselves and how we can perform and make ourselves right. But God's going to do something different. And so Joseph, don't be afraid. And I wonder if he'd asked the question, is it going to cost me something? The answer would have been, yeah, it is. There are going to be people who don't want to do business with you anymore. There might be family members who are not going to want you around anymore. It is, but don't be afraid. Don't be afraid because God is redefining what it looks like, what it means to be made right with God, to be righteous. The account goes on, and he is told this, and she, Mary, will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. This is what God has been talking about for so long. That there is a bigger purpose that God has playing out in this world. And your plans, they may not have been bad plans, but God is doing something that is overarching. And believe it or not, you get to be a part of what he's doing. Is that going to change some things down where you live? Oh, for sure. For sure it is. But don't be afraid. Because a new day is beginning. All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. And this is a way of saying this is nothing new. God has put this word out there a long time ago. And then these words from Isaiah that were written over 800 years before Jesus was born read like this. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. It's the purpose that God has been up to since the beginning of the brokenness of this world, that he was going to redeem, that he was going to restore, that he was going to invite people to join him. And in the day in which Jesus came, people decided how wide or narrow that gate was. Well, God's about to do a new thing because God was going to be with us. And God was going to be for us. And his name was going to be Jesus. And Mary and Joseph get to participate in what God has been about since the beginning of time. But for them personally, there will be a cost. There will be a cost. So what are you going to do, Joseph? When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded, and he took Mary as his wife. That is a legal, public step to take. What he's doing in front of his entire community or whoever wants to be there, and no doubt everybody would hear about it, is he says, I'm going to marry her. We are going to be husband and wife, and the rest of my days I will be with her. He knows what's coming. He knows that people can add up dates. They know how babies come into this world, and they're going to talk. And they're going to conclude, as anybody would, either it was you, Joseph, and you are not a good man, as we define it, or it was somebody else, and if it was somebody else, you're a fool to stand with her. Don't be afraid, Joseph. So he's given one step to take, and he takes that step. Now, you know what's interesting about that is that that's the only thing that he was told at that moment. Was he told how the rest of the story would play out? No. Was he told, hey, you know what? By the time Mary's just about ready to deliver, you're going to have to go down to Bethlehem, the city of your forefathers, because there's a governor who's going to issue this decree that a census needs to be taken because he wants to make sure that he's getting the right amount of taxes from the whole populace. So you're probably not going to want to leave Mary there, exposed all by herself. So you're going to go, and it's going to be a 90-mile journey. That's going to be fun. Oh, and then after that, that's not all there is either. Because there's going to be this maniacal king, and he's going to be threatened by a birth of a newborn king, and he's going to see that as a threat to his own position and authority. And so what he's going to do is issue a decree that we're going to kill all the little boys in an area that have been born within a certain time frame. And in killing the many, we will make sure that we get the one. And so you're going to be alerted at the last minute, and you're going to run away to another country, and you're going to live there like a refugee for 2 years. Does Joseph get all of the story? No. He gets the next step. And what does he do? He takes the next step. And by doing that, what he does is he joins himself to two stained reputations, Mary and Jesus. But he joins God in what he is doing. And in doing so, he's a part of a new day. But he did not have sexual relations with her until her son was born, and Joseph named him Jesus. And that again, that last sentence there, is a legal public step in that day where he is saying, I adopt this baby boy. He is my son. And together, they're going to join God in what he's doing. And they don't have all the answers. And they don't know where it's all going to lead and how it's all going to end. But again, some 30 years later, Jesus talked to a group called the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. These were the people who were in the good category. And Jesus said these words, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will surely not enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, how could that be? And I wonder if when Jesus said those words, he had in his mind's eye, and you know what? I've seen that kind of righteousness. I've seen the kind of person who wants to honor God and follow God and obey God, and somebody who wrestles with what does it mean, though, to still care about people and show compassion to them, that it is not as simple as black and white, and sometimes you have to wrestle with things, and God doesn't always give you the answer before you know how that outcome is going to play out. I've seen that kind of person. I grew up in that home. And Jesus talked about a new kind of righteousness, one that was not dependent 100% on our performance as we define it, right? Because if I define my performance, the circle around me, I'm good to go. The rest of you, you got some issues. And that's just how we do it. Jesus said, no, that's not how it works. God's invitation comes through grace. It's His doing. And He's going to define for us what righteousness looks like. And it's not what we would create. And it's not what we often think. But it's an opportunity for everyone to draw close to God. Why? Because Jesus came and said everything's good, everything's great? No. It's because Jesus came and said everyone matters to God. And so anyone can draw close to God. It's His doing. Is that why Jesus found it surprisingly easy to walk alongside people who were scandalized in that day? Maybe because for all of His growing up years, He heard the whispers and the chuckles of people who made fun of His mother, called His father a fool. But it was a new day. And God was doing something different than this world of ours has ever seen. And so if you find yourself today at the place where the plan is not exactly playing out the way that you had hoped and dreamed, you are in good company. And we might say, well, what are we to do? Here's what all of this has been saying, and really my only thing to leave you with here today. You don't have to understand the plan to know that God has a purpose. He's been doing the same thing from the beginning of time. He has been seeking to redeem and to restore one life at a time, but it's going to be on His terms. And as we live it out day by day and moment by moment, we don't always know exactly where that's leading. We don't always have all the answers to the questions. And probably my guess is here, every single person knows what it's like to feel some anxiety and anguish over decisions that we have to make. And could it be even in our lives, just like it was for Joseph, that anxiety removal, anguish removal is not God's number one priority? But instead it is maybe to open up these hearts of ours so that we can learn something in those moments that we do not learn any other time. So what am I supposed to do then? Well, let's do what Joseph did. He took the next right step with God. He didn't know all the steps that were out in front of him. He didn't know all the twists and turns that were ahead. It wasn't always easy. But he took the next right step. And for us in our day, a lot of times the circumstances are different. And to be honest with you, I've learned this principle from people here more than from my own life. I was meeting with somebody, I don't know how long it's been now, months, perhaps even over a year. And she came and talked to me about planning her funeral. She had just received the diagnosis of cancer. And the prognosis was quite poor. And she wanted to talk about the day when her service would unfold. And she wanted to talk to me because she's never been married, has no family here. She's here all by herself. And I think that would be an opportunity for somebody to talk about the way that maybe we envisioned things versus the way that it turned out. But that was not how that conversation went down. She was talking to me that on that day, here's what I want to have happen. And she looks at me and she kind of points at me and she goes, don't you let that day be a downer. And I'm convinced if she could have reached across the table and grabbed me by the shirt, she would have. Don't you let it be a downer. Let it be a celebration. And I said, well, what do you want us to celebrate on that day? God's been so good to me. Celebrate God's good to me. somebody with cancer, whose days are limited. And that's where I think these words are made true, because either that's just a bunch of spiritual jargon that we conjure up inside of ourselves, or it is the difference that God makes, that even in a broken world where things do not always go the way that we planned them, there is a God who has a purpose beyond all of it. And believe it or not, all kinds of people get to participate in a relationship with a God who's that big. But it's not on our terms, it's on His. And His terms are His grace and His power. I'm going to invite you to bow your heads together with me as I pray. And God, we thank you for the many ways in which you extend your goodness to us. And God, so often in this world of ours, we come up with ideas of what it means to do what you want us to do. And God, many times those answers are all kinds of shades of gray rather than black and white. But God, even in the middle of that, you're at work. And there's a purpose that you have, and a purpose that will not be derailed, a purpose that will not end. And God, so help us to know that if we're in a place where we're not legitimately feeling the joy of this season for some reason, help us to know that if it hasn't ended in joy, it hasn't ended yet. That we're still journeying with you, and that we have the opportunity to take another step and to continue to walk with you. And so God, help all of us to do that. Help us to know what that next right thing is and to trust you for the outcomes. And God, we are so thankful that being made right with you is your doing and not ours. Because we can never perform enough to be on the same level as the Holy God. So thank you for working your way all the way down here in your mercy and grace and extending that to us. We thank you for who you are and for the difference that you make. And we ask and we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.